find yourself questioning why anxiety is so high for our kids? And what is it about the school day and the classroom that leaves our kids so dysregulated? Sophie David is an early years specialist, author, founder of Little Happy Learners, and lovingly known on Instagram as @LittleHappyLearners, where she champions playful, purposeful learning for young children. 3 things you'll learn from this episode are why play isn't just fun, it's essential for learning, and how, if there is too much cortisol and not enough dopamine, our kids are not in the right zone to learn. How anxiety shows up physically in kids, and what most people miss. The unexpected use and power of yoga balls in classrooms. Sophie's latest book, Read, Write, Play, is a call to reimagine early reading and writing by putting play, movement and hands-on learning back into phonics. With over a decade in education, Sophie's mission is to help raise curious, confident and resilient learners. Sophie's mantra is every child deserves to love learning. I'm so pleased to welcome Sophie to the podcast. Sophie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I always start just by asking my guests just to tell our listeners just a little bit about you, your background.
So I was a teacher, a primary school teacher in a mainstream school for maybe about 8 years before I became a mum. My passion was early years. I absolutely love early years. I am a play advocate. My mission now is to just get more people playing as much as possible, adults and children. So my mantra is that if you enjoy what you're doing, you will learn. And if you continue to learn and you're enjoying it, you'll never stop. So that's just what I try to do. So everything I do just encompasses as much play and as much fun as possible. So that's where we are now, just trying to get more people to play and have fun.
So you were in education for, as you say, was it just over...
Nearly 10 years.
Nearly 10 years. So you have a very good idea of what it's like being sat in the classroom and the curriculum. What struck you on reflection since having your own children about how you feel changes could be made to the curriculum to, I suppose, to bring more play into the classroom?
Exactly that. Just that one thing. We need to bring more play into the classroom. There needs to be more opportunities for children to tap into what they're good at. I've said it recently and I want to shout it from the rooftops. As adults, we go into this part of our lives where people say, tap into what you're good at, find out what you enjoy. That's what your career should be. But throughout our whole children's education, we're telling them to be good at English and maths, and that's the most important thing. Why is it that we're not finding out as young as possible what our children's interests are, what they love doing, and tapping into that then and helping them to grow throughout their education? I just feel like there's too much pressure put on our children to meet these set of rules that are very outdated. The education system just needs to change for our children. And I think why I'm so passionate about play is because through play we understand and we can see what children's interests are straight away. It's why my passion was early years, because being in an early years classroom, you look around and you can stand there and instantly understand a child within 30 seconds, where they're at, what they're doing, how they're interacting with others, and you learn so much about them. I absolutely adored being in the classroom because you could just see these children going off in their own little worlds, and some wanted to be by themselves, and that's okay. I think there's just too much pressure for our children to be communicating with everyone, building friendships, and every child is different, and I think that's what's wrong with our education system at the moment. We are not adapting for our children's needs.
I do think that's where our neurodivergent kids are really good at shining spotlights on this, because they do sort of just say no. Mm-hmm. I remember trying to get my kid to read, and bringing home these quite like disinteresting books. And again, not really tapping into their interests and what they want to learn about. Whereas I have another child who, you know, will very diligently sit and read and grasp things quite quickly and not really question what they're doing. Whereas I feel like the neurodivergent child just has an ability to really make you stop and think. So what I would love to talk to you about today, Sophie, because this isn't something really that you have talked about very much openly, but your own experience with your children and their different, brilliant, spicy brains.
That's definitely a word to describe it. They're very spicy. All three of my children are very spicy. And I haven't spoken about it at all. We are on our own journey to finding out. We're still very much in the process, and it's a very long process if you let it run its course within the NHS system and with the education system. We've been in this process with my eldest for nearly 3 years, and we still haven't got a diagnosis. And the one thing that I feel that I want to stress so much to any parent that's going through it or hasn't quite started the process is you are your child's only advocate. And yes, there are teachers and there are educators that want to get behind you, but you are the person that knows your child the best, and advocate for them as much as you possibly can. So just to give you a little summary, I'm a massive oversharer usually, so I'm going to try and keep it really nice and short and sweet. But I knew that my eldest was neurodivergent from when he was born, I'd say pretty quickly. I knew he has got a huge attachment to me and only me. I mean, he didn't like his dad until he was about 5 at all. Much to his dismay, because he tried everything and he just didn't. We
laugh, but it is tough, isn't it?
So tough for him. Oh, and he's just the best dad, and he does everything he can. And honestly, he would never go to sleep without me. And so we even made storybooks with pictures of him and his dad, and he'd try and read it to him every night. No, he even had a little box of toys that he played games with him before bed. Nothing worked. He only ever wanted me. And it's still a little bit like that now. He's got much better with that, but it's an attachment thing that we're going through and we've had to work through. We joke about it, but we still probably haven't had a date night since he was born.
Right.
Because we can't. And it's something you learn to adapt with. And I think the reason why we only started the process 3 years ago is because with every step we took, I saw huge signs that I needed to support him. And instead of thinking I need answers, we just put things in place. And I can do that. I'm an educator, and I know that that's really making it sound much more simple than it is. But you do just have to look at your child and see how you can lean into their differences. And I think that's why I loved teaching in the early years so much, because that is what I like to do. I like to lean into these differences and quirks that they show you and just sort of jump in. So with him, there are things that we've put in place, like not leaving the house ever.
Right.
No, but that's a joke. We obviously do leave the house, but there are things that we've put in place for him. But the thing that we struggle with the most now with him being in year 3 is anxiety. And I think that's why we've had to push and be his biggest advocates, because he's been diagnosed with migraines because they don't want to look at the bigger picture. Migraines because his anxiety shows itself in such physical ways. He gets really unwell, his tummy hurts, his head hurts, and that presents itself quite frequently. And we've worked out the patterns and we understand that now. He's so good at communicating that now. And we're still very much in this journey of finding out what it is, but I will not rest until I get answers and get support from the education system and from the NHS, because there are so many children that are in this position where as parents we're struggling to get them to school, and attendance is the most important thing. Whereas I want something in place to say that if our children, more children than ever, are struggling with anxiety, more than ever, and this is the pandemic that no one's talking about, that anxiety is huge, mental health is huge with our children at the moment. And whether that's because they're neurodivergent or whether it is just anxiety, we need to do something about it and something needs to change. the only way we can do that is by talking openly about it and helping each other and supporting each other in making ways that we can do that. But the education system needs to adapt to our children that physically can't go to school because they are broken and feeling anxious about things. And the only way we can do that is by keep talking about it, which is why when you asked me to come on, I was eager to come and speak about it, because I get questions about it every single day.
Well, I'm very grateful that you have chosen to come on and talk about it. I think it's really, really important. And I think it's one of those things as well where classically on Instagram, you see squares of a certain life, and it can be very easy for people to think everything is absolutely hunky-dory. And actually often behind those squares, everybody has a story to tell and has their difficulties. I think, Sophie, that you are the most creative, inspiring. I just think it's incredible what you have done. If you really think about it, like you've come out of education and you've gone, right, how am I going to do this? And you have just developed this amazing page that's just full of, it makes me feel really hopeful, and it makes me feel like we can be creative and there are other ways. I had one child who I was able to teach phonics to, and one which, it was, at times I gave up. I just did not know how. And even to this day, I kind of feel like the foundations have been missed because I don't feel that it's really gone in. And something I wanted to ask you about was, if they are further on in their development, how can we help them kind of catch up? Because in the classroom, it feels like phonics and reading, there's so much focus on it.
I'm going to go in like a linear way with this. So first of all, what I do and the reason why my Instagram has shaped the way it is because I have to play with my children, because they have this drive to do it. So I think people naturally look at my page and go, oh my gosh, this is so creative. And I think sometimes it feels like they can't access it because it's too much, or that we're doing it every day. But that's how my children cope. It's how they regulate themselves. So every single day, they all have needs. My eldest is definitely neurodivergent. Whether we've got the diagnosis or not, I know it. But they've all got very different needs, and they need that time with me at the end of the day, after school or on a weekend, to regulate. That's when they talk to me so much. So if you then have a child, like you say, that you're worried that they've missed these points, and there is such a pressure in the classroom to have phonics. Also, what I would say is that phonics schemes are so rigid that it's easy to feel like that. And I don't want parents to feel like you've missed the boat with learning to read and write, because you haven't. It's just the way the phonics schemes are set out now. They're so rigid that you feel like you have to meet all these posts and these goals. But I want you to just strip it back. And this is what I say to everybody. I train parents and I do lots of courses around this, and strip back everything and think about your child and what they enjoy. You can add reading and writing to skateboarding or climbing a tree. You absolutely can, because if that's what they want to do and they want to move, then add that into their learning. So go to the skateboard park and throw down some words and get them skating across different words and reading those words. Add in, and I cannot stress it enough, add in their special interests wherever you can, because that is where you will engage them. This is why I think play is the most important thing we can do, because I want you to just, as an exercise now, you as well, Izzy, I want you to think about a time that you were in the classroom sat at a desk when you remember a lesson. I want you to just think about, sat at a desk, what lesson was it? Okay, I have a very vivid memory of sat at a desk in a boring classroom, surrounded by people, but I remember the lesson. Okay, what is it? And I'll ask you, Lizzie, what is it that you remember about that lesson?
Well, I'm in a chemistry lesson. That's really random. And we were like lined up on benches. And I remember not understanding at all what the teacher was talking about. I remember being quite distracted in terms of like, I think because I didn't understand it, I switched off. So often, I guess, was quite bored. I also remember being in maths lessons and thinking I'm not good enough, I can't do this, and everyone else can do this.
Both of those things, you're talking about this release of cortisol, and that's a stress. And those memories are linked to this feeling, yeah? When we flip it on a different thing, and I now want you to think about a time when you absolutely loved and you feel like you will always remember that lesson because it was amazing. I want you to think about that and what that made you feel. What was it? What lesson was it?
What an amazing thing to think about. Because immediately I'm in music. Yeah, I'm in music or I'm in drama.
And so in those moments, what were you feeling in those lessons when you instantly connected with it?
Well, it was something I could do. It was something I loved. I was happy.
So what have you got in your brain? That dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yeah. So this is where we always have to think about those two things and those two feelings. And so for me, a lesson I can sit, and I know I was in a boring lesson. I was sat there listening to a teacher, but then there was something in her voice. And I remember it now. I love history. History is my thing. It's my special. Tudors especially, Henry VIII especially, but because of this one teacher, she obviously loved Henry VIII, and I witnessed this change in her. She's talking about something boring, and then she started talking about Henry VIII, and I could see in her face, she lit up. She was talking about, she was so energetic and enthusiastic about it that became my specialist subject when I was in school. I loved it because then I wanted to learn everything about it, because I saw her reaction. Everyone in the class, we all loved it because of the way she was so animated. Her dopamine fed into us and we were so excited about it. You can ignite that in children in a classroom. You can, sat at a desk. That's not to say every lesson has to be this memorable thing, because we do learn in maths because we constantly try to, drill it and we go over it and we practice again and again. But those times when we make the best learning moments in our brain are those that are linked to dopamine, when we enjoy it, when we are having fun, when we do not have cortisol present and that stress and that we want to take that away. So the only way we can do that is through play. So my page is filled with play because it's not only because they're learning about what we're doing then, but it's when they open up the most. They will talk to me every single day after school if I have a list of things to do, and I know it's so hard as a working parent when you've got a list of things to get through, but as soon as they get home, that's an hour, just me and them, doing whatever they want. And sometimes it's us getting ready for dinner, but they will be chopping and cooking with me. And I'd say 99% of the time is when I find out someone shoved me at school today.
Yeah.
I learnt this at school today. Mummy, I read this book at school today, and they'll tell me everything about it because they're lost in this world of just our time, just this connection, and it helps them to regulate, and then they'll then go off and they are ready to learn. So we need to always make sure 3 things when we want to teach them anything. 1, they're ready to learn, so they're in a state of calm, they're regulated, they're never ever going to do any learning or playing or build any pathways in their brain whilst they're stressed. So you need to make sure they're ready. I always say with that, especially with our neurodivergent children, look at the triggers. Do you know your child's triggers? Do you know when they're not regulated? My eldest is when he's hungry or tired. If he has either of those things, we won't be able to access anything in his brain. The second thing you need to do is just try to make it as enjoyable and movement focused as possible. And if your child is also one of those that doesn't like getting out and about and moving, which is quite rare, I think most children do like to do that, but if they don't, then tap into what they do enjoy. But it should be something that gets their bodies moving, because when our bodies are moving and we get all of this rush of hormones in our body, it helps us to learn. This is why sitting at a desk is just mind-blowing, why that's still the case that we do every day. And the third thing is just to constantly try to engage with your child whilst you're doing it. So I'm asked all the time, how can I get my child to do this independently? Your child cannot do anything independently without you showing them first. So it has to be a joint thing to then become an independent thing. We want to build confidence, like you said in your experiences. 1, in maths, you had this stress because you felt like you couldn't do it. But in music, you had this confidence, which then it brings enjoyment because you feel good at it. Children want to be good at things. So always ask yourself, if they're finding something difficult, why are they reluctant to do it? Because that reluctance often comes from the way they're feeling, and that reluctance comes probably from a lack of confidence. I feel like I've answered that
no, that's
all over the place.
You could just keep talking. It's very insightful and incredibly helpful. If you could sit in front of whoever it is that makes all the decisions about our school curriculum, what would your message be? I know obviously you've talked a lot about with what you've just said, but what we all say something needs to change. We all feel it. We all talk about sitting at desks. We all talk about things feeling archaic, but how do we change it? Because the fact is there are always going to be lots and lots of children in a classroom. I feel like for neurodivergent kids, there's so many, and for all children, there are a lot of barriers that feel they're in the way. How could we go in and actually start to make these changes? Flexibility.
That's and adaptations. That is, I think, the thing that we need to work on. It obviously in my dream world, children would just be able to play and learn through play all the time, or even in secondary schools, I would have them playing, because I think as adults we learn the skill to play. So I do, as much as I'd like to talk about play forever, but I know that's not going to happen. We're not going to become a society where our children are allowed to play, because that's not going to happen. So what we need to do and what we need to put in place, that we can put in place, is flexibility. We need to be able to adapt for our children's needs. For example, when I was a teacher, what naturally happens with teachers is when they're passionate or they're good at what they do, they get taken out of the classroom and they then start to train other teachers. And I loved my job, and I think that's the reason I was good at it. It's just because I was enthusiastic and I absolutely adored it. But I got the privilege of going to other schools, and I went to one school that was progressive, and it was unbelievable. The head teacher was just on board with teachers teaching the way they wanted, as long as they were doing what they need to do and teaching the curriculum, they could do it. And I went into one classroom, and it was a male teacher, and all of the children were at desks, but they were on yoga balls, and they were bouncing whilst they were learning. And I just got this real energy in there that they were all doing. It was a really boring lesson as well. I think it was something in history, but it was a really dull lesson. But the kids were all so engaged with what they were doing. And I had a chat with the teacher after, and I was like, what's the theory behind it? And he said, children don't want to be sat still. As soon as you ask them to sit still, and this is neurotypical children and neurodivergent children, but he said, my classroom is adapted for neurodivergent children, not just for those children, but for the whole class, because it benefits all of them. And I was like, what? This is what we need to do. Like, why are we focusing and making just changes for the neurodivergent children when actually all of our children could benefit from it? So they were all sat there on a yoga ball, and he said, look at them. He was like, just look around. They're all bouncing. Some of them were sat still, but he said most of them were bouncing. He said, not once will I tell them to stop. Not once will I ask them to sit still. Not once will I tell them to stop talking, unless it gets too rowdy. And he said, I've never once had one of them throw the ball. I've never had one of them throw themselves off it. He said, because I've allowed them to do what they want. So by allowing them to do what they want, they don't push boundaries. And obviously you will always get a child that does. You will. And he didn't express that because I was there observing him, but you will always get a child that pushes boundaries. But then he said what he would have done in that case, because we asked that question, he said, I would have taken it away, and they would have quickly realised that sitting at a chair is very boring in comparison. But all of the classrooms, they all had something different. So he was on yoga balls, and he supplied them. He was like, it was my dream, I wanted to do it, I bought them all. And this is why teachers are fantastic, and I don't want this to ever be something I'm saying against teachers, because we're in a very rigid education system. As a teacher, I spent so much of my own money because I wanted my classroom to be a place where they came and were happy and safe. And I can't tell you how many teachers across the country are spending their own money on resources and things for their classroom, spending their own time researching and trying to understand all these different types of needs that our children have, because children are all diverse. So this is never against teachers. Teachers are doing a fantastic job with the resources they've got. It is the education system that needs to, one, help us to be more flexible with our children as parents, but also for teachers. We need more training for our teachers to understand all these things. I think that listening to the podcast that you did recently about PDA blew my mind. There were so many things that I didn't know about that I then thought, actually, just listening to this as a teacher in that setting, I could have learnt so much. But we're not getting access to those resources and that training. So I think in answer to your question, with all those words, is that we need to be flexible, adapt, and we need to have the resources to train ourselves in everything and just have a deeper understanding of the diverse needs that our children have, especially those in our classrooms.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on children masking at school.
I can talk about this from my own experience, but also as a teacher. So my eldest, I think the reason why it took us so long to go down the route for diagnosis is because he's very good at masking. And if you don't know what masking is, it's exactly what it says on the tin. They put up a facade. Every teacher that my son has encountered has told me that he is the ideal student. He follows every rule. He does exactly what he says. My son absolutely hates the idea of being in trouble. So he will do everything he is set out to do. But quite often he will do that and he won't participate in the lesson, but he will sit back and it looks as though he's learning, but actually he is in a level of stress and anxiety where he cannot learn. And this is my frustration with the system, is that in that you can't learn when you're in this level of stress, when you've got all of those emotions and hormones in your body. So actually there's no benefit to him being there if he's in that state. They often say with masking that it's not a child that doesn't need your help, it's a child that is crying out for help but doesn't know how. So it's very important for us to pick up on those cues. So cues are those that when they're in school, you're told that they follow all the rules, but you're seeing a different side to that at home. Sometimes they can have really physical reactions to those. So they'll be masking all day and they can come home feeling really unwell. They can have those full meltdowns. So my son doesn't melt down. He doesn't have tantrums. But what he does is he crashes. So he comes home and he can be, if he's had a particularly rough day at school, he's exhausted and he just wants to sit and do nothing. Sometimes doesn't even want to eat. So it's about picking up on those cues as a parent. Are you noticing that they're starting to say statements that you haven't said, or that he may have picked up from someone, or they may have picked up from someone? That's really common. But as teachers, there's one very, very simple thing that one of my son's teachers did, and she picked up on it. And I think it's so important because it's something any teacher can add to their day. If you notice a child that looks like they're listening but they're not participating, they then maybe look like they're struggling a little bit with the lesson that they're set off to do independently, one simple question can change that child's perspective and help you to support them. And it's by just saying, are you finding anything tricky today? Are you finding anything tricky from that lesson? Is there anything you want me to explain to you? Because often in a whole class setting, that child that is masking, they won't put their hand up to ask that question. So therefore, they're sat in a state of stress and anxiety whilst everybody else is doing whatever they're supposed to be doing. And I know that my son will come home after a difficult lesson and say to me, I can't go into school tomorrow because I didn't understand it. And this is why people, they don't like this statement, but I love homework. I love it when they come home with homework. And I've changed the narrative in my house now because my kids love it. Because now I know what they're doing in school. So I can go over anything that he's done at school with him and explain it to him and take the time that he needs one-to-one to go through it. I love it because I'm a geek, I'm a nerd, and I love that. But he now loves it and it's his time. It's his one-to-one time with me. So we've flipped the narrative. We don't have the argument of, I don't want to do homework, please don't make me do it. It's, Mummy, can we do our homework at this time on Saturday, or can we do it then? Because he knows that he's going to get that time with me. We're going to sit and we're going to unpick all the things that he's found difficult in school that day or that week. And that's what's really nice. If you have that open dialogue with the teacher, especially when you know your child is masking or finding things difficult, I have this narrative where I say, could you tell me what you're doing in maths this week so I can go through it with him? And she will. She'll tell me exactly what's happened. I think it's having this open dialogue with the teacher makes masking a lot more accessible for you as a parent, because you can tap into what they're finding difficult, but also with the teacher to get them to understand that these things they're showing you, this ideal student that sits and does, is necessarily hiding a whole different side of them.
And that's actually a really good tip there, that, you know, perhaps you might feel, oh, I don't want to bother the teacher, or I don't know, you're sort of constantly making excuses because you're just muddling through it all yourself. Mm-hmm. And actually perhaps having that relationship with the teacher on an academic side of being able to say, right, what are we learning? Could you give me some resources? Or how can I,
Absolutely.
You know, and actually hearing you say that as a teacher as well, I guess you would want parents to come and talk to you and have that communication. That's not really something I have necessarily thought about. I obviously, from a sort of emotional point of view and how they might be, you know, coping on that level, but actually talking more about the academics and not just once a term when you meet for a parents' evening.
What's really
and
hard.
You have, you know, however many minutes before the bell rings and the next you know, family are in.
And you can often feel that stress from a teacher. We know that they have lots of children in the class and they've got so much to do. So I think you often do feel like that. But as a teacher, I had an open door policy. If you had an issue, I would have wanted you to come and speak to me about it, and so that I could help. I wanted to support. You know, there are so many things that we can put in place for homeschool links, because what I believe and what I strongly believe as a parent now, having been in the education system, that the parent's role is to supplement education at home. And it's hard to do that. We've got so many clubs going on. My children don't do that many clubs after school, purely for the fact that they need that downtime. And I'm very, I'm really quite strict on that. If they ask me if they want to do all these different clubs, I'm like, no, actually, that's our time. That's our family time. That's our time that we get. And I get to have an insight into what they're doing. So I'm not mean. They do other things and they're outside, but we do so much at home together that we won't get that back. We won't get that time back. So it's very important to have these homeschool links. And I can't speak for every teacher. I had an open door policy. I wanted parents to come to me and speak to me about things that are going on at home and how I could support them. And I'd say that the majority of teachers are like that, because we only ever went into the profession because we love teaching and we love children. So we want our children to be happy in our classrooms. I think it's just about opening up that confidence. I think we come from a generation where teachers were held with this authority, and actually they're just humans that want to support as much as possible. And if you take that away and just go and speak to them just like a human being, I think they will always want to help you.
And actually, when you're talking about flexibility as well, you know, homework can be really traumatic for a lot of households. And, you know, actually to be given the option to just not do it could be enough to make your child say, I want to do that because my friends are handing in there, you know, and then it's the PDA, it's that kind of autonomy, it's their choice then. Yeah. But, you know, I think what we can really take from your experiences, but also from your Instagram page, is how we can integrate that play. And I think a lot of us are also probably quite traumatized from the COVID times.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think we're not all natural teachers or naturally playful, or we've forgotten how to be playful.
That's what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I would say from that is that I am not. This will blow everyone's mind because I am massive, like a play advocate. I'm terrible at playing. I've had to really teach myself to play. I'm not very good at immersing myself in imaginary play. So how some people come to me, I'm not crafty. I am. Some people say to me they're not. I then say exactly the same. I'm not good with role play. So with toys, when they come to me and say, can you play with my dolls or things? And I'm like, no, I don't know how to do that. But I've had to teach myself. I get probably maybe 10 different parents say to me each week, but I'm not crafty, I hate mess. I'm like, that's okay. But there are ways that you can adapt and flex to add that into your day. So if you don't like mess, do the messy stuff in the bath or in the shower. Do the messy stuff outside where you can just not even think about it, or you can hose it down afterwards. If you're not crafty, please don't worry if you're not an artist, because I'm not an artist. And your children, you could draw a stick man and I'm pretty sure they would think that it's the best thing. They don't care about
Or they'll
that.
just laugh at you.
Yeah.
They laugh at my art because Harry, my husband's so good at art and I am so bad at drawing things or like cutting straight lines or anything like that.
Yeah,
so
but it adds humour.
Yeah, exactly. And humour's really important.
It's so important. And I think, but it also is really good to do art with them so they can see that they don't have to be perfect at things. Because I think, especially with my eldest, he really struggles with not getting things exactly right, or if it doesn't look perfect, he really struggles with that. So being next to them, doing those things and showing them that not everything needs to be perfect all the time is a good thing. But also, you did say your first point there about homework is, with our children, especially with PDA, they want the choice. I've taught my children, especially that they have the choice. We get homework sent home on apps and we don't do it. I've shown them that firsthand, that if there's something we don't agree with or we don't want to do, we do not have to do it. And I've had that open dialogue with the teachers and said, we won't be doing spellings on apps. We won't be doing the numbots on this app because we like to do things physically. I don't want to encourage them to just sit and be passive and do things on a phone or on a tablet. So it is about giving yourself the choice to do it. And if you don't want to do the homework and that homework is causing stress, don't do it. You can do that homework in a different way. It doesn't have to be in the way that they've set out. So it's about adding these playful and your children's interests into everything, especially homework. So if that's causing stress, please don't do homework. And I'm pretty sure any school will say the same. We don't want to be causing our children more stress. We only want to be doing it if they are enjoying it and having some sort of benefit from it. Homework's not beneficial if it's a stress release. It's not. There's actually no evidence to say that homework's beneficial at all. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
There isn't.
Just thinking about what we were talking about earlier about anxiety being so prevalent and so many children experiencing it, and sort of I've had anxiety forever, so it's a familiar friend that sits on my shoulder who I have tried to learn lots about. But actually what you're saying, if a child is in that cortisol state, that is going to be, the result is going to be anxiety, which would kind of point to the evidence of why the environment isn't working and why we are having these levels of, and maybe the academic pressures are more, because people will say, well in my day, children didn't just not go to school, which that's a whole other thing to unpick, because it's not like this is neurodivergence.
By the way, in their day, that would have happened.
Yeah.
So children just wouldn't have gone to school. They would have. My mum used to bunk off. She would openly say to you every day she would go and hide, and they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And so in her day, she hated school. She had such anxiety about school, and she would just not turn up.
Yeah.
She'd take her pocket money and she'd go and get some chips and sit and not go. So it did happen. It just happened in very different ways. Yeah. And I think that's what we always need to think. And we are moving on. We're moving in a really good direction with the way things are going. We are more aware of those diverse needs. But I think anxiety, the word anxiety is used so much by so many different people that sometimes it takes that idea of real life altering anxiety, it takes that away, because I have anxiety. I've always had anxiety, and I'm medicated for my anxiety because it gets the better of me, but in a physical way. I get breathless and I can become very stressed. I've learned to deal with that. Like you say, it's like a part of me that I'm learning to deal with, and still now I'm finding things to deal with. But and this is where you have to make the difference, and this is why I am such an advocate for my son, because I know the difference between me and my son. I have learnt to deal with my anxiety all my life. I've put things in place to do it. He cannot deal with his anxiety when it overcomes him. He will do anything to get out of that stress situation, and it's fight or flight for him, whereas my body's never had that response. It's never had this fight or flight response. So this is why I said earlier we're in this pandemic of anxiety, mental health issues with our young children, because I think it genuinely was something he was born with. I can think back to a memory that I have of him when he was 2, and we went to a friend's house, and I had to tell him everybody that was going to be at this house. And when we arrived, my friend's husband opened the door and I didn't know he was going to be there. And that was it. It set him off. He was anxious from the moment, was screaming, crying, hysterical, and I had to leave within minutes. And it was one of those moments where a real defining moment for me that I thought, this isn't just anxiety. This is something more. And he can't cope with not knowing who's going to be there. He can't cope in that situation. I even had a bag of toys that I used to take off with him, and we'd sit somewhere, because I knew that was sometimes his reaction to new places. But in that moment, just that one thing and him being there, we still joke about it now, like, oh, Matt was there.
Yeah.
But it was just a trigger for him, and we couldn't get him. So that was my real defining moment, that there was something that I needed to do. And then we've had to manage that and cope with it as we've gone. So I think, I feel like we need to have things in place to understand when it's a life-altering anxiety that is definitely more, and he is neurodivergent. I am pretty much 100% sure that he's autistic, just without the diagnosis. And I think that's when we need to question ourselves, is this anxiety that we can deal with and put things in place, or is this something that we need to look into and really understand and get support with? And that's where we need to look at it like that, I think.
I think as well, with anxiety, with our children, I think when we were younger, emotions were just not talked about in the same way. So I'm wondering if, because we have more of these open conversations and we share more, or, it's been highlighted to us as parents now to talk more openly about our emotions and that we experience these things as well, that I often wonder whether it then gives them the opportunity to kind of let these feelings out a lot earlier.
I agree.
I think I probably didn't know. I genuinely thought when I was younger that I was the only person that had this feeling.
Yeah, I think I felt the same, yeah.
Whereas I think now, because I've always wanted to speak to my kids and give them tools, whether that's through mindfulness, through talking about our emotions, that they are able to express their feelings a lot more. And, and maybe that then gives them that opportunity to kind of crumble from time to time, because they're being given that permission
to feel,
to feel
and to label it, I think, because what I would say is that, and what I'm really proud of, is exactly that. I always felt like my feelings were too much. So I've always been really aware of that. So from a young age, I've spoken to them about their feelings. We've labelled them. So if I'm feeling something, I will say, I'm feeling really angry and I need to take a moment. I need to have some time. And so they're now doing that. And I hear them saying, I just need a minute by myself, please. Which is beautiful, because it just shows through practice and through hearing and through experience, they start to pick up on these things. But my eldest will say to me, so for this week, as an example, they break up for half term on Friday. But for some reason, I think they're exhausted. But he's had a pretty anxious week, and he's had a tummy ache every day. He's asked me every day if he's got to go to school. So every day what I've had to do is plan something after school for him to do. So he's got something to look forward to. And it's the only way he's got through the day. And so I will say to him, are you too unwell to do your bike ride after school? And he'll say no. And I'll say, okay, so do you think you're too unwell to go to school? Which then he says no. So I said, okay, well, you can go to school then. And he goes to school. But he can label that. He says, I'm having an anxious week. My tummy hurts. I've got butterflies in my tummy. And I think that's just through us constantly talking about it, because his responses to anxiety are so physical. He's had headaches, he's had migraines where he can't even open his eyes because he says he can't see. So he's had these real physical responses that we've then had to really unpick and understand. And we've had doctors say this is anxiety. So then we've been able to label it, and now he knows he can say those things. He's 8, and I don't think I labelled my feelings with anxiety until I was in probably my 20s.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. But some books that are amazing that talk about emotions really openly are Tom Percival's books. Have you got them? Yeah, amazing. Like Ruby's Worry. Finn's Little Fibs is a good one, because when they go through that phase of telling us little fibs or making a story quite elaborate, that has been quite a good one. But they're fantastic because it really does talk about all those things and open up these discussions in a child-friendly way. I couldn't rave about those enough because they are fantastic.
Yeah, books are powerful, and I'm still, well, I'd love to actually hear from the listeners if there are any books that have been really, really helpful, because I find, when anything happens, like when we lost our cat, we didn't lose our cat died. I read, the book on Mog. Yeah. And it's sort of a way, or if they're starting school or potty training or anything like that.
It's always a book, isn't there?
A book is just so...
They're so powerful.
So powerful.
Yeah,
Talking of books, you have a new book coming out. Do you want to tell us more about that, Sophie?
So I've got a new book coming out called Read, Write, Play, and it's 100 different ways to play with phonics. So it takes me back to my roots of being in the classroom, and it's just different ways that we can make phonics really fun. It's from phase 1, so our youngest children it says on the cover 3 to 7, but we can start doing this as young as even 18 months if you want to. I started at 2 with all 3 of mine, and because phase 1 is really explorative, it's just really understanding and listening and just building this background knowledge of what we need to do to learn to read. And then it goes into up to phase 6. So when our children are in year 2 and they're starting to fluently read, how we can really start to develop those skills. But it's to make it fun. It's to supplement what you're doing at school. You can be doing any reading scheme or phonics scheme at school and do these games. I've made it so that it's really easy for parents too, because there's QR codes in there and you can scan them and you can print stuff and just cut it out. So you don't have to be crafty.
That's what we like.
Exactly. You don't have to be crafty. It's for those parents that want to do these things with their children after school or at the weekends or during half terms, when you have that guilt at the end of the half term and you go, I've not picked up a book with my child. It's just ways that you can make it fun. And that's the main premise of what I do. I just want to make learning fun, because that's what I love learning. I'm still learning every single day. And I think if we can embed that in our children from as young as possible, then they will just want to learn forever.
Yeah, that completely radiates out of you and inspires me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple more things I wanted to ask you, Sophie. So you obviously have such a depth of understanding for early years and teaching, and did you find it, how was your thought process and your decision process with your children starting education? Did you ever question whether you would do it a different way?
Yes, I'm asked this every single day, every day. Did I ever consider homeschooling? And I absolutely did. And the only reason my children have gone to school is because of my eldest. And the reason why is because his attachment is so strong, and that's not a negative thing, by the way. It's not at all. I absolutely adore the fact that he idolises me, but because it was so strong, I spoke to lots of educational professionals and they said we need to try and help him to build more relationships. So he was the reason why we decided to go into mainstream school. And look, I went to mainstream school. I was in the education system, and I have lots of lovely experiences and memories of it. And so I've said this openly. For my children, I chose to send them to a mainstream school for the experience, and then I choose to educate them at home. It's 2 different things. We need to see it as different things. I love doing what they enjoy at home, and they all have these amazing personalities that love all these different things, and the way they learn, it's just fascinating how they all learn so differently. And we had a brief discussion earlier about how different girls and boys are, and we can talk about that because boys and girls are different. They're programmed completely differently. My daughter is 4 and she's already asking me if she can write letters to people. My boys never did that. They didn't want to write at all. So it's fascinating. I love it. I love watching them. But I also love how they interact with other people. I love that they build relationships with teachers, because I think teachers are incredible, and I think they have such a huge role in our lives. If we open up to these relationships and allow our children to feel those relationships, I think it can be a really, really positive thing. So as many negatives I can find with our education system, I think it's absolutely beautiful, and the experience of school can be a fantastic one.
And finally, what would you like to see change for our neurodivergent kids in the future?
I'd like to see them seen, and I'd like their needs met, but not in the typical sense. I'm not talking, because this is so loaded. I want so much for our neurodivergent children, but I want them to feel seen. I want them to have this autonomy over themselves, that they know that they have the choice, but also that they can learn. There's not one person in this world that cannot learn. And what I find most frustrating is that I speak to parents every day that tell me that their children are not good at something. They're not very good at English. How can I help them? It's not because they're not good at it. It's because they've not found a way to enjoy it. So what I want to see change is that we are adapting to help our children to learn in the best way for them, because they can. Every person in this world can learn. We just need to find the way that we learn best.
Thank you, Sophie. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we've got time for on Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids. Thank you so much to Sophie for joining us. Don't forget, you can follow her on Instagram. She's at Little Happy Learners. If you enjoyed this episode, please do give us a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. Until next time, thanks so much for listening to Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids.